Rahmanir Rahim. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum and welcome again to this weekly webinar with me, the moderator, Sayyid Mahdi Abidi. As you know, the topic of this recurring webinar is Islam and contemporary issues. It is a topic that's usually discussed every Monday evenings at 6 p.m. UK time. But due to the clash of Maghrib Salah, the time of the Maghrib Salah, it is actually being held an hour earlier at 5 p.m. UK time, inshallah. But after Ramadan, we will be returning back to the usual time of 6 p.m. So if you're watching here, do not be alarmed at the time change. And welcome again. As you know, during these webinars, we are joined by different esteemed scholars and learned guests that delve into their own subtopic, of course, relating to the main topic of Islam and contemporary issues. And today, we are blessed to have Hujjat al-Islam al-Muslimin, Sheikh Abbas Bahmanpour, who is joining us, inshallah, from Finland. Quick biography. So Sheikh Abbas Bahmanpour, he has actually studied at the Islamic College in London, and he is the current Imam of the Risalat Islamic Society in Helsinki, Finland. And I believe the topic that today, the subtopic that our dear guest has chosen today is genetic determinism. Sheikh, salam alaikum, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
Inshallah, whenever you're ready, we can begin today's webinar. And of course, during the webinar, you, the viewers, can send in your questions. I'll be monitoring all platforms, YouTube, whether it's on Zoom, YouTube, or the Islamic Center of England's website. I'll be monitoring them all, inshallah, and we'll be able to receive your questions. Dear guest, Sheikh, the stage is now yours, inshallah.
Thank you. Let me just share the screen. Great. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Okay, so the topic for discussion today is genetic determinism, and I'll be explaining what I mean by that briefly, and then we'll sort of look at that in the view of Islamic theology and what that entails for us as human beings and why we are on this earth. So what is determinism, first of all? So determinism, as the word suggests, refers to everything being determined beforehand, meaning that there is no indeterminate future. And depending on which view of determinism we take, there's different means by which that future can then be predicted. So it's this idea that the future is not unpredictable, rather it's set on a certain track, and it follows that track no matter what. And as we said, there's different views on that. Today we'll be talking about the genetic determinism, so the idea that your genes determine things. But in general, generally speaking, determinism is an idea that in its hard form, in its sort of very extreme form, let's say, it's something that is at a clash with free will, meaning that there is no free will, because obviously everything is determined, and therefore human choice is simply an illusion and it does not exist. And as we said, this has been argued based on different premises. So even some Muslims have argued for determinism, saying that everything is predetermined. And that we don't have actually this free will or this choice, ikhtiyar. It's just something that we think we have, but in reality we don't have, and it's all actually based on the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything that happens by His decree, by His will, by His power, and we're just simply like characters in a video game, to put it in a modern sort of perspective. We're not actually doing any choices. He is doing all the decisions regarding that. So they pointed to different verses of the Quran. Obviously, there's many verses that they have quoted, but we won't be bringing all of those up because that's not our main purpose today. But for example, they have referred to famously this verse, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ, that you do not wish or want anything except that the Lord of the worlds, that is the Almighty God, except that He wills it. So everything that happens just happens by His will, and we don't have any choice. And this is called Jabr, and the people who espouse this were called either the Jabriya or the Mujbira, meaning the sort of determinist. Jabr comes from being forced. So they were the determinists. Obviously, as we said, this has been argued by Muslims, and it's been argued for a long time by some Muslims in different forms, but this is the very extreme form. And when our Imams, peace be upon them, were asked about this position, that is it Jabr, they answered لا جبر ولا تفويض ولكن الأمر بين الأمرين أو أمر بين الأمرين, that it is neither Jabr nor is it Tafweed, but rather the issue is between the two issues. Tafweed referred to the opposite extreme of the Jabriya's viewpoint, which was sort of the viewpoint of delegation or sort of complete freedom, in the sense that human beings were created by God and then left to their own devices, and we sort of like, we can do everything ourselves, and we do it completely independently of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're completely free in our choice, and that's Tafweed, and the people who espoused that were called the Mufawwidah. However, obviously, as the Imam said, it's neither here nor there. So it's not that we're completely free, because obviously, as Allah says in the Quran, we do not wish except that He wishes. But that does not mean either that everything we do is determined. Rather, it's something in between that. Now, obviously, this short quote, it doesn't explain it, and it's not really our purpose to go too much into depth into this argument. However, very briefly, the answer would be that we as human beings act out of free will, however, by connecting to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by Him giving us leave to act. So we're not independent when we act. We require that Allah gives us the permission to act. He allows us to act in the way that we wish to act, because there is no power independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power, there is no capability except the power and capability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we behave, it's not like we're doing it completely independently. When I make a choice to act in a certain way, the choice is mine. However, the ability to do that is given to me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the easiest example of that is, for example, if I have, electronic devices in my home, obviously nowadays they have batteries, most of them, but let's suppose it's plugged in now. For the sake of our example, I have, for example, a computer that's plugged in to the electrical grid. Now, I am free to use that computer as I wish and as I want. I can do good things with it. I can do bad things with it. However, it is dependent on it getting the electricity from the source. So in this sense, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like that power plant which is sending that electricity, or that battery which is sending that electricity, which gives the ability for that device to function based on the choices that we make. So we require that power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to act in any way that we act. And obviously, this doesn't negate our free will. It's still our choice. We make the choice to act in what way we act. And in fact, it is that choice and it is that free will which makes us special and unique. free will in the sense of being able to choose between good and bad, which is that which gives meaning to true goodness, because good things are not really good until we choose to do them based on free will. If you're forced to do something good, we don't say, oh, you're a good person. No, you're just being forced to do that. Maybe if you got to choose, you do all sorts of horrible things, but now you're being forced to act in a good way. So being forced to do good things, not having the choice, that doesn't make you good. It does not allow you to draw close to the beautiful qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the good qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, justice, righteousness, honesty, mercy, kindness, love, these sort of things, which are the beautiful names of God. When we act according to those, based on choice, we draw nearer to those things. Well, anyways, that's its own discussion. We don't want to talk about that today. However, yes, Allah, everything happens by the will of a God. And of course, God also knows everything that has happened, that is happening, and that will happen. And even furthermore, anything that could have happened. This all is known to him. So yes, in the sense that Allah knows everything that will happen, in that sense, the future is fixed and unchangeable. However, obviously, it is also based on our choices. So if we choose different things will occur in the future. And Allah knows, obviously, all those possibilities and all those possible outcomes. And we have to keep in mind here that obviously Allah's knowledge is not comparable to our knowledge. We cannot think of it in the same way. And it's not also temporally limited. It's not limited by time. We don't know what happened in the past. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We're not even sure everything that's going on right now. So even something that's happening in front of us, we don't always fully understand. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously, he is not limited in that sense. Past, present, future, these have no meaning to him. It's all as if it's at once. Anyways, but yeah, in that sense, yes, there is some sort of soft determinism there when we accept that God knows everything and everything happens by his power. However, not hard determinism in the sense that we don't have any choice in the matter. In Western thought, determinism has also been espoused in different ways. So it's not just the Muslims. And by Western thought here, I sort of mean secular, or like, let's say, philosophical thoughts, not religious thought. Obviously, in religious thought, same ideas of fatalism have also been presented as amongst the Muslims. So the most common form of this sort of philosophical determinism is what is called physical determinism, which means that physical things happen according to the laws of nature, according to cause and effect. This was the cause and that is the effect. One cause does not output different effects. If all the variables are the same, if all the variables are the same, then that cause with these X set of variables will always give Y as the output. And this is the basis of the scientific method, and the idea that results of experiments can be replicated and verified. Because if it's following the same rules, then the same outcome, same parameters for the experiment, the same outcome should be had. Otherwise, there was something wrong with the parameters, some variable that we didn't recognize or understand was there, and that's why it wasn't replicated. So now, if this cause and effect is true in the laws of nature, then we are bound to the laws of nature. Everything that we do is based on that as well. So we don't have a choice either based on this sort of idea. Everything that happens according to cause and effect, and similarly, our lives, we just go through this series of causes and effects where we have no choice, because we are physical beings and we are physically determined like everything else in existence, according to this theory. So this was famously theorized by Pierre-Simon Laplace, French intellectual, who said, and this is a quote translated to English, "We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion and all positions of all items of which nature is composed." And by this he means, okay, atoms, subatomic particles, all particles, everything, energies, forces, everything, items. He says it on purpose, so it's very general. Meaning, this, let's suppose there's an intellect. It knows the composition of everything and exactly where it is and exactly how it is and exactly how it's affecting each other. Well, this is like a God, isn't it? But as a philosopher, he doesn't refer to God. He's just talking about this intellect. If this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. So it could, based on that, figure out everything that was. How did they result in this? And what will it result in? So everything should be determined. He said, okay, well, now theoretically, if such an intellect could exist, well, even if it doesn't exist, everything should still be following those laws, and if we were somehow so super intelligent, or something was so super intelligent, it could also figure out everything that happens. The fact that we cannot determine what happens in the future, that there's unpredictable things, is because of the lack of information and data and knowledge that we have. Otherwise, that's why we think we have free will, because we don't understand the chemistry of our brain and how the particles are reacting there together, which results in what we think is choice, but is not actually choice. So this brings us to a more narrow type of determinism called biological determinism or genetic determinism, our topic of today. So obviously, in a more narrow sense, it's not so absolute. Okay, everything in nature can be determined, but it's just saying that, okay, let's look at human beings. Do we have free will, or are we determined in our behavior and actions? Now, according to genetic determinism, those who espouse for it in the hard form say that, well, we know that human being is comprised of information on a genetic level, and this genetic information determines our physical bodies, and our physical bodies also determine everything, because again, there's no soul according to this view. We're just brain, chemicals, etc. Just reactions going on, chemical reactions going on in the brain, and these determine what we do, what we like, what we don't like, our personality, our quirks, our traits, everything. Not just how we look, but the brain determines everything that we do. And based on that, they say, well, free will is an illusion, isn't it? We're just this sort of chemical machine, and everything is determined by our genes, our personality and how we behave and what choices we make. It's all based on that genetic information. Obviously, there's that, I'm simplifying it, there's that nature versus nurture. So some things are determined by our nature, other things by our environment, the so-called nurture. Well, this idea has then prompted many scientists and pseudoscientists to carry out studies and experiments, some of them very dubious, to argue that, okay, how, or to determine how human beings, how our genes determine who we are and how we behave and so on. So some of these have gone into eugenics, and this was quite popular in the 19th century, for example, when they were saying, okay, well, human being is determined by this, its nature, and the superiority, for example, of white people and their bigger brains and stuff like that. And all these things they were arguing. And obviously nowadays there's also modern studies now that human genome has been mapped and better understood. They say, well, now you can find genetic markers for different things. We can find genetic, well, let's go test people in prisons, who have committed violent crimes. Let's test their brains and their genes, and let's scan with MRI machines. And then we can say, okay, then based on these studies, they have come up with, like explanations that, or, markers, genetic markers, or certain things in the brain, which say, okay, this is common amongst people who are, do violent crimes or criminality in general, or sexual deviance, or their intelligence, or even things like psychopathy. And there was an interesting article I was reading just a few weeks ago about some university professor who was doing this studies based on brain scans and how it can, show people who are psychopaths. And then he found one of the results, which was a psychopath, was accidentally his own MRI, which was there. He was like, oh, I'm actually a psychopath. And so, yeah. Anyways, for such reasons, sometimes people have called out such studies as unethical, saying, well, you can't deem a person just because they have a certain type of brain or certain genetic markers that now, for example, they're going to be criminals, or they're psychopaths or serial killers or something like that, rapists. And obviously, yeah, there is an ethical problem there. And obviously, I guess some sci-fi movies and series probably have been done about that as well, where I can imagine, and I don't think I've seen it, where they would probably weed out people who have such terrible genes. Obviously, well, we said these are modern studies, but the idea of genes, okay, not in the sense of DNA as we know it today, but the idea that we inherit things from our parents, that we inherit traits from our parents, not just physical traits, but other traits as well. This has been known for a long time. There is a hadith, for example, that talks about this that I came across. Now, the hadith is from Abu Huraira, so we take it with a grain of salt. However, of course, it shows that at some point in the early days of Islam, at least, this sort of idea was already known to people. So the hadith says that a man came to the Prophet and he said, Ya Rasulullah, inna imrati wulidat ghulaman aswad. My wife has given birth to a black son. And obviously he means like a black skin. So he's saying, okay, I'm not black, my wife's not black. Where has this black kid come from? He was worried about this. The Prophet then said to him, according to the report, do you have any camels? He said, yes. He said, what colors are the camels? He replied that they are red. And then he says, okay, are there camels who are different colors? Or are they all always just red? And he says, yes, sometimes they give birth to different colors. He says, well, how do you suppose that is? If they're all red, why do they sometimes give birth to non-red camels? That perhaps something in its roots has come out, has displayed itself. So that something, in their previous camels, their forefathers had different colors, and now it's sort of come out. And he says, perhaps your son has also been affected in this way. And obviously this is something we know in genetics today, that some genes are recessive, and they can, many generations, they can be recessive until they suddenly show themselves. So, sometimes we have even like both parents are one skin color and they give birth to another skin color, or we have like twins where one is one skin color and there's another skin color, and this has happened. There is also another hadith which is interesting and we should quote here, and it's a famous hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says in the report, "Ash-shaqiyyu man shaqa fi batni ummihi, وَالسَّعِيدُ مَنْ سَعِدَ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ." That the unfortunate one, the wretched one, is the one who is wretched and unfortunate already in the womb of his mother, and the fortunate one, the felicitous one, is the one who is already so in the womb of his mother. Now, some have said, okay, well, this is it. This means everything is determined, isn't it? Whatever we are already in the womb, whatever Allah knows, our genetic markers, that's already there determining what we are. Well, no, that's not what it means. It's not. This hadith is not referring to genetic determinism, and it's been explained by a hadith reported from the seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, which according to him, he was asked about the meaning of this report from the Prophet, that ash-shaqiyyu man shaqa fi batni, that the wretched is already wretched in the womb of his mother, and so on. It says, فقال الشقي من علم الله وهو في بطن أمه أنه الشقي من علم الله وهو في بطن أمه أنه سيعمل أعمال الأشقياء والسعيد من علم الله وهو في بطن أمه أنه سيعمل أعمال السعداء. That the wretched is the one who Allah knows already, or should be من علم Allah, who Allah already knows that, yes, it's man alima, who Allah knows that he in the womb of his mother, he will do the actions of the wretched one. And Allah knows already in the womb of his mother that he will do the actions of the fortunate one, the felicitous one. So obviously this is referring to what we spoke in the beginning, that Allah knows everything that we're going to do. Does not negate our free will, of course. Something similar to this is in the Quran as well. ما تحمل كل أنثى. Yes, Allah knows everything. ما تحمل كل أنثى وما تغيض الأرحام وما تزداد كل شيء عنده بمقدار. I should have quoted a bit more of the verse, that Allah knows everything that every woman carries in her stomach when she is pregnant, in her womb when she is pregnant, and what is removed and what is increased, and everything is according to an amount. Everything is determined with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows exactly what that person will be and what will their outcome be, and so on and so forth. Oh, in another verse, هو الذي يصوركم في الأرحام كيف يشاء. He is the one who makes you in the wombs as he wishes. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. There is no God except him. He is the mighty and the wise. So do these verses also say what the determinists are saying, that everything is determined by our genes? No, obviously. This is referring that Allah knows how he has created us. And he knows what dispositions he has given us. Not that our genes determine us, but how our genes are, what they're going to make us look, and what quirks and traits they're going to give us, what sort of tendencies it might give to us, what dispositions it might give to us. And that's the correct view also on what these studies about geneticism have concluded or alluded to, which is that just because you have a gene marker for something doesn't mean that, okay, now you're definitely going to be that. And that's a misunderstanding of these studies. It just means that, okay, you have a tendency towards that. Just like, okay, you might have a tendency towards bowel cancer or something. It's a genetic trait that you have. And you might have a genetic trait, yes. You might have a genetic trait that predisposes you to aggressive behavior, or perhaps very passive and pacifist behavior on the opposite end. People have different genes. And this is what, there is some shade or maybe, let's say, some uncertainty put into this by those who have tried to argue that sexuality is determined by genes. But obviously they have an agenda there, because they want to say, well, for example, if I am a homosexual or whatever, it is because my genes have determined. I was born this way, and I couldn't help it. This is how I was born, and my genes have determined this for me, and I don't have any choice in the matter. And because of that, because of the desire to forward such an argument for justification of this behavior, they have sort of veered into this very dangerous and very dubious sort of claim of genetic determinism. Our genes determine who we are, and we don't have any choice. So therefore, if someone has criminal genes, they're going to be criminal. Someone has this gene for sexual deviance, they're going to have sexuality. And obviously, this is fundamentally flawed because, well, we know cases of, for example, identical twins, genetically identical twins. Their genes are 100% the same, and yet they have, different personalities, different. One is homosexual, one is not. These are scientifically recorded cases that exist, which shows obviously that, okay, even if someone has a tendency towards something because of their genes, does not mean that they don't have a choice in the matter, and choices affect, or choices are always there, no matter what. And in the end of the day, that's what we are, all human beings, isn't it? And we all make our own choices about what we want to do, and we all understand that. That we don't need to. I hate arguing philosophically about determinism, because it's a pointless argument. Because at the end of the day, we all, as human beings, we realize and understand that we make choices, and when I do something, I have made a decision to do that thing. Yeah, even if there is pressure for me to do that thing, it still was my choice in the end of the day, even if I'm being pressured. I'll give the example of addicts. I talked some long time ago, perhaps in one of these lectures, about addiction, and we talked there how like the addict's brain, and the release of the chemicals, etc., and it makes it so difficult to leave that thing which you're addicted to, because of the forceful desire that the addict has to following that addict's behavior, or that thing that it's addicted to. However, the harsh truth is that in the end of the day, it's that person's choice. Even if it's super hard, and it can really be hard to leave that behavior that you're addicted to, it's still your choice. That's the harsh truth. That's the harsh reality. You're still, every time you're engaging in that behavior or that person, they're making that choice, to follow that behavior. And if someone's, for example, addicted to drugs, they could just, or alcohol or whatever, they could just one day wake up and say, I'm not going to do it anymore. And those who have recovered and who have, gotten rid of addict behavior, that's what, you could go and read the stories. They're like, I just, X happened, Y happened, whatever, I decided I need to stop. And then they stopped. And it was their choice. And it's a harsh truth, because a person who's stuck in that, they don't want to hear that, because they think, oh, I don't have a choice. It's so hard. I can't, I can't. But in the reality is that it is what they choose to do. And yes, it's hard, but actually that's the point of life, isn't it? Allah has put us here to test us, and we're tested in different ways, but we're all being tested. Allah has created life and death. He's put us in this temporary world where we live for a short amount of years, just to test us, to see who amongst you is the best in their actions. And He is the mighty and forgiving. And this is very important, this end of this verse, isn't it? That Allah is the mighty, He is the Aziz. He's actually the only one who is free from all external influence. Yes, we are influenced by so many things, our desires for money or wealth or fame or children or spouses or this or that. We have these sort of desires, and they're influencing our behavior. They're calling us to act in certain ways, tempting us. Allah is the only one who's free from these external influence. Nothing affects Him. He is Wal-Ghaniyul Hamid, isn't it? He is the needless and the praised one, above everything else. Yes, we're influenced, but that is why Allah is also Al-Ghafur, isn't Wal Azizul Ghafur. He's the forgiving. He knows. He knows He's testing us, and it's difficult, and sometimes we might give in to those temptations, but we should then learn from those mistakes and change our behavior and overcome our desires. And these tests can be different ways. Some can be tested by being rich, some can be poor. These are all tests. It's not to say, no one can say, okay, it's unfair, my genes were like this. We're all tested, and Allah knows how He's testing us, and He is going to reward us based on how He has tested us as well. So the reward, the judgment, the test, it's all individual. It's all Allah takes into account the circumstances and the things that He has given to us. Allah does not give anyone duties that are beyond their capacity. He is testing us, and He knows how He is testing us. But you can't say it's unfair. Oh, it's unfair I was born rich, or unfair I was born poor, or unfair I was born a man, or unfair I was born a woman, or unfair I was born in this country, or that country, or this culture, or that culture, or this time, or that time, etc. Yes, these all affect us. Our nurture, our environment affects us, our nature, our genetics might affect us, but it still boils down to our choices and the choices that we make. And that's what Allah wants to see. What choices do you make? Yeah, and He'll take into account those circumstances that He has placed us in. And there's no need for all of us to be in the same circumstance, because the point was to test us in the choices that we make, and that can be tested in a trillion different ways, in different circumstances, and it's all still testing. So to conclude, alhamdulillah, today I managed to keep it within the time limit. To conclude, yes, it's undeniable. The scientific evidence is there, and the colloquial evidence is there, isn't it? We all see the fact that genes affect. For example, when my daughter was born, I was all the time like, subhanAllah, I'm so amazed at how much she is like her cousin. When I was looking at my niece, I was always like, oh, she's like this, she's like that. And now when my daughter was born, I'm like, oh, she's like the exact same. All so many traits and quirks and behaviors and personality. And it's just, for me, it's like, we're, subhanAllah, so much of a person's personality is affected by their genetics, obviously this is something we can all see that, and we can all see that. Oh, people behave like their parents or siblings or whatever. Obviously, there's some nurture and environment there as well, but definitely genetics plays a role there as well. And yeah, it can include things like what we like, what we dislike, what dispositions we have towards certain things, what quirks we have, traits. However, the fact that we still are making the choices, that's also undeniable, isn't it? At the end of the day, we all make those choices. And even if I have a quirk or proclivity to do something, it's not an excuse, that, okay, yeah, I have to do that, or just because I have a proclivity, genetic proclivity, for example, to be, I don't know, let's say, a procrastinator or whatever. I can say, oh, it's genetics. Well, no, I still have the choice. I should be realized, okay, now I need to, grab a hold of myself and do what I need to do, so on and so forth. Yeah, and as we said just now, each person is tested in their own way. So it doesn't matter, that we're different or we have different tendencies. And obviously, when we go to the more extreme examples, I think it becomes more clear that genetics or proclivity or tendency is not an excuse. So if we go, for example, things like violence, psychopathy, being a serial killer, we can say pedophile, whatever, sexual deviancies. We can say, yes, there's studies show genetic markers and proclivities and tendencies for these things, but that doesn't excuse a person's behavior. There's lots of people also who have those tendencies and they don't behave based on that because they control themselves. And, in the end of the day, both extremes of these sort of genes or whatever, these tendencies can be vices, and there can be ways in which we're tested. So, for example, if someone who rebels against authority, he never wants to listen or do what they're told, this could be a proclivity or whatever, genetic, hereditary thing, and someone might have, proclivity towards being very meek and submissive, and these can both be tested. Both can be vices. Sometimes it can be bad to do what you're told, and sometimes it can be bad not to do what you're told, and the opposite way around as well. And this is all, as we said, part of that test to see if we can overcome our own selves, if that free will, as we said, that we have been given, that makes us special and makes us capable of being good. Do we choose those good things, even if we have the choice, and even if we're sometimes called and we have a desire to do the wrong thing? do we still manage to overcome that and choose good? And that actually, this is why human being is in it. He is the best in the creation of God, because he could face immense pressure to do something wrong, but be put in some of the most difficult circumstances and still choose righteousness and and to behave as God has commanded him and draw close to the divine names. And that's what makes him so capable of amazing things and such a high station. واخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد. Yeah, I hope I have not been talking to myself and you guys are hearing me. I think our moderator.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, it was just a technical issue. Thank you so much for that enlightening talk. Just had technical issues. I'm currently at a hotel right now, so sometimes the Wi-Fi does.
Mine was off, and I talked 40 minutes myself.
No, of course, we were all listening here. So thank you so much for that talk. Of course, this is the segment of the webinar where you, the viewers, are able to send in your questions. We do have a few questions already that have been sent, inshallah, for the Sheikh here. The first question I have for you is that a human being may make a bad choice because they do not know the end result of their choice. So, these kind of mistakes, do you think they, link in? I don't really know what the person is trying to ask here, but he just sort of added a question mark at the end of that. So a human being may make a bad choice because they do not know the results of their choice.
I think I understood what they're getting at. Yeah, of course, two things to keep in mind. First of all, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, or as we have in the Quran, وَلَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى, that our actions are based on our intentions, or in the verse of the Quran that what belongs to man is his effort. That's our capital. So Allah is, of course, not judging us on the outcome of the actions ever. He is actually judging us based on the intended outcome of the actions. And therefore, we have, for example, a hadith commenting on this verse of the Quran that, the Imam says that if a person who used to go to, for example, Friday prayer to the mosque, and then they become old or sick or unable for some reason to go, Allah will command the angel who was with him to write him the reward of going to that Friday prayer as if he had gone. And vice versa, if someone used to go to do sins and then because of old age, infirmity, or circumstances is not able to go do that sin, Allah will command the angel to write him as if he had gone to do that sin. Because in the end of the day, what's important to Allah is not actually the outcome of the actions as much as it is what we intended to do and what we wanted to achieve and what we love and what's important to us and what we strive for. That what belongs to man is his effort, what he strove for, what he loves, what's important to him. So yes, in that sense, a person might want to do something good and they were careful and they considered everything and it ended up with a bad result. Of course, he's not taken into account for that. Obviously, the bad results will still be there, the effects will still be there, but the spiritual effects of the sin of rebelling against the will of God is not there because he did not intend to go against the will of God. And secondly, of course, when it comes to our predispositions and our traits, these might influence us or make us want to do certain things. And therefore, it's very important that our environment, today we talked about genes, but yes, our environment as well. So our environment or our genetics or whatever, our nature, our nurture, both of those might affect us to want to do certain things, to have a proclivity or desire to do certain things, or to think that something is good. Yeah, and I should do this. But it's very important here that we come down to the very basis of the religion of Islam, which is submission to the will of God. So, in the end of the day, this is where I have to put aside what maybe society has taught me or what my own tendencies might make me want to do and say, okay, I have to submit to the will of God. So yes, if in my action, I went knowingly against the command of God, But because I was influenced by nature and nurture, then that's a sin. And if something bad comes, I'm responsible for that. But if I have submitted to the will of God and I have done as He has commanded me, and then something the outcome was something negative, I'm not accountable for that.
Thank you, Sheikh. There are discussions in the scientific world about genetic mutation or the ability to control, for example, the gender of a newborn child or a child that is going to be born. The ability to determine what gender he will be or she will be born in. Is that a contradiction to the way of Islam? Like, does that contradict what Islam promotes? The ability that Allah knows. The knowledge that Allah knows everything, and He decides what is born and what isn't born, and the freedom for humans to control that. Is that going against the will of Allah?
No, we cannot go against the will of God. Everything that happens is the will of God. Even if we were to, for example, in IVF, choose the gender of the baby, which is quite simple nowadays, because it's simply about choosing the right spermatozoa. So it's not very difficult for modern scientists to do that. But even if we were to do, of course, it's ethically debated. Is this correct? Because this can result in huge gender imbalances based on cultural tendencies. And there's even cases of, for example, abortion, where there was in Sweden some years ago, where a woman aborted her baby because it was the wrong gender. Anyways, ethically it's very dubious, but it's not. At the end of the day, it's not an act of rebelling against the will of God, because everything happens by belief and the will of God. He's given us the choice. We can make unethical choices, we can make immoral choices, we can make wrong choices, but we're still doing that by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because as we said, He wants to give us free will. That's His desire. His decree has been that He gives us the free choice, whether we use it for good or for bad.
Another question is can we change our future, depending on the amount of sadaqah, the charity that we give, or is our future already predetermined?
For sure, what we do affects what will happen, and the decree for God. Obviously, it's a long theological debate about the levels of the decree of God. There is a final level where He knows everything that's going to happen, but there is a lower level where which is sort of more perceptible to us, where we choose to do something and then a different outcome comes because of that. Obviously, God knows all those possibilities. And now we have hadith about that as well, what is called bada. So, for example, we have the hadith in a hadith of, well, if a person does dua, this will affect their future, and Allah will change their decree. Now we're talking about the lower level of the decree, and it's called bada. And there is reference to that in the Quran as well, in Surah Al-Kahf, when in the famous story of Musa and Khidr alayhi salam. Now, there Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how Khidr did certain actions, and it changed the future that would have happened if he had not done those actions for those people. For example, breaking the boats. If he hadn't done so, the king would have come and taken those boats, etc. So He's changing what's going to happen. Now Allah knows all. Now we're talking about in the higher level of His decree, He knows all those different outcomes, as we said. So Allah not only, as I said in the beginning, not only knows the future, He knows all possible futures, and that's the highest level. But in the lower level, He knows that which is also going to happen. So you do this, this will be the outcome. If you do that, this will be the outcome. So for sure, we have so many hadith. And say, if you give said that, for example, your lifespan will be increased. If you cut off relations with your family, your lifespan will be decreased, and so on and so on. So these things affect, for sure, they affect. On a physical level, they affect as well, isn't it? Because, for example, if we isolate ourselves from family and society, will be more depressed and stressed, and we'll have more heart issues, etc. And so our lifespan will decrease. So we know that on a physical level, but obviously also on a spiritual level as well.
The final question is if you can summarize the difference between the Shia belief of predestination and the Sunni belief of predestination, that's being, how much Allah decides for a human before he is born.
This is Final question and another lecture, but very, very briefly, there is not one position amongst the Sunnis when it comes to free will and determinism, and it's a big debate. Obviously, the most famous theological position that most Sunnis follow today is that of Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari. So the Ash'arites, as they're called in English, he had his own, and to be quite honest, quite convoluted take on how free will and the knowledge of God and the fact that everything happens by the power of God interact. That he concluded with something called the kasb. So he said that, we don't actually choose to do actions. We don't do actions. We acquire actions. However, we choose. There is a choice in what we want to acquire. So we want it, and then it's given to us. Well, it's quite convoluted. At the end of the day, it's trying to say something similar to the idea that we have the choice, and it happens by the power of God. The Shia view, as we said in the Hadith, is explaining that it is between Jabr and Tafwid. So no, we're not completely free, not that we act as independent agents, nor neither are we determined and forced. However, it is something that it's between those two. So we have the choice, but as I said, we connect to the power of God. It is his decree that I get to have that choice, and he has empowered me to make those choices.
Ahsant, thank you so much, Sheikh, for that amazing talk and for answering all the questions. Thank you for the viewers who had sent in your questions and, of course, participating here on our weekly webinars on YouTube and also here on Zoom and, of course, the Islamic Center of England's website. A reminder, a final one, that this is a recurring webinar, inshallah, every Monday evenings, with the main topic being Islam and contemporary issues. It is a webinar that usually takes place around 6 p.m. UK time, but due to the Maghribain prayer times, it is actually going to be taking place, inshallah, 5 p.m. until after Ramadan, inshallah. So thank you so much, Sheikh, for joining me. So from me, the moderator, Sayyid Mahdi Abidi, and our dear guest, Hujjat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, Sheikh Abbas Bahmanpour. I bid you farewell, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.